So it described this as being process evangelism, but there's not a lot about process evangelism. Did any of you look at the Alpha videos? Any comments?
Changed a bit from when I did the course.
Yeah, quite. Haven't got Nicky Gumbel in his teeth anymore.
No, or Pippa, the delightful Pippa in the audience.
No.
Mrs. Gumble to you.
Yeah.
Really, he's not, because I haven't had a chance to look at them, but I've just recently done Alpha and we're still using the Nicky Gumbel videos.
Right. Yeah, well, now it's all live. I mean, it's streamed.
Oh.
Because I did youth Alpha in the old way, and then you had an online account. You did your what do they call it, course builder or something. So you could assemble together all the film clips and all the text and everything else. You could print off PDFs or Word docs. You found film clips. We bought DVDs to illustrate the ideas. Gave out Bibles so the kids could read them. And
DVDs. When I did mine, it was VHS.
yeah, I remember
VHS. The sessions were on VHS.
But we had VHS in Zim. And yeah, we ran it in Zimbabwe with VHS and Nicky Gumbel. And then when I did in after 2014, we like we'd get children's movies. There'd be a clip we'd film. And then we'd play the clip from a DVD as part of the evening. And that's basically how you illustrated stuff. You found the pertinent clips on YouTube or on DVDs or things, and it worked really well, I thought. When my daughter did it, it was when it had gone all electronic. I mean, when I say did it, when she was leading it with a couple of grown-ups from Krakow, and I kind of missed it. I kind of missed the effort we put in. It's far easier now. I mean, you don't have all the legwork to do that we had to do. But I thought what we did was really good. The course was really good. And the new production values are better. It's more kind of slick, but I don't think it's gained anything in content or feel. Anyway, I don't know. What do you think, Blevin? Did you see it?
I saw a little bit. I don't particularly like videos.
Right.
And you get a lot of movement. If you look at the news these days and somebody talks about something or other, there's a little side picture with things moving for them to watch. And I'm too old-fashioned, I suppose, perhaps too doer, but it irritates me.
You'd rather just have Angela Rippon sitting at a desk and reading out from a script.
Yeah. Well, somebody like C.S. Lewis could do it very well. You didn't even have to see him.
No.
But nowadays, they just have to have pictures. I think it's a sort of a warp of Confucius. You use 1,000 pictures to describe one word. I'm very negative.
No, I mean, you've got a point of view, and there are limitations to the video format, which, sensibly we should take account of.
Mm.
There are limitations to it. And what's one major problem with the whole video format business? And what do moving images tend to do to people?
Well, on the positive side, they can make you really think, and certainly television has been shown to draw people into it, so that they become almost part of the action. That can be a good thing or a bad thing.
But the moving image is at best a simulacrum of a real person, isn't it? And one of the things about moving images is that people will watch moving images even if they have no interest in the content.
Yes.
In other words, there's an aspect to moving images which tends to kind of hold your attention irrespective of what it's actually saying or doing.
Yes.
So there is a, for want of a better word, a kind of hypnotic aspect to it, which is completely irrelevant to whatever it's actually setting out to achieve.
Well, yeah, there's a center in the brain that will make your eyes follow them. It's automatic.
Yeah. And so people will basically, I'd say, I mean, it's true, it can make people think, but I'd say generally speaking, it has the opposite effect. It tends to switch people off. You know, it tends to make people more passive and less thoughtful, you know, and reduce their ability to process, to interpret, to evaluate.
Blather might be able to correct me on this. Didn't they used to put fish tanks on mental wards?
Yeah.
Watching fish. Oh, yes. Yes.
And dental surgery, I think, as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's used to put them up.
Well, famously,
Calm people down.
Yeah.
that was
People's homes as well. They're calming.
I wonder what's happened to it. I used to have my Youth Alpha stuff on the top shelf in my study here. That's course builder, that's right. We called it a course builder. And yeah, in the film Finding Nemo, the kidnapped clownfish ends up in a tank in a dentist surgery.
Well, there you go.
Anyway.
If Disney say it's true, it's true.
So the church's existence does not always have to possess the same form in the future that is possessed in the past, as though this were the only possible pattern. Discuss. What do you think?
Well, we don't do it in Latin anymore.
No, certainly not.
Bit obvious, really, isn't it? We've got electricity now.
Yep.
Which is one of my arguments against church organs.
What is that?
Well, we've invented electricity since we had church organs. So you can have...
It's surprising how much of the first century there still is. And I know this because I was waiting for Jane and my wife to have a hair done this morning. I was reading worship in a chapter in it. And the amount that comes through and still is the same is enormous, really. So it's not the only possible pattern, but it's a pattern that's been stuck to for millennia. Interestingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, there's a lot of consistency to it.
Yes. You anointed me with holy oil last Sunday.
Yeah.
Jeremy. Yeah, which was lovely. And there was a laying on of hands.
Yeah. But with but if you look at the church building, so you get the oldest church building in Britain, I think it's like 9th century Anglo-Saxon stone church. You can recognize exactly what's supposed to be what within the building. And if you do a service in there using an English service, the words aren't that different from the ones the Anglo-Saxons had been using.
No.
And some of the clothes are even the same.
Oh, yeah.
So that is a remarkably stable kind of form.
Yeah, I've read that if you want to read Beowulf in Oxford now, if you're doing an English degree, you don't have to read the Old English. There's a new English translation.
What's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to Oxford to study English, why are you going to read a translation of Beowulf?
Yeah.
I think the one they use, I think, is Tolkien. So I think it's to push Tolkien books.
But the whole point of going to Oxford is so you can make your own translation, so you can read it in Anglo-Saxon. Huit, waif, remedon, ingir, gardini, off, shield, shene. I mean, that's what you want, isn't it? You don't want to flip it English. You want Anglo-Saxon, man. I know, look at my T-shirt. That's the Odyssey. I mean, if you're going to go to uni and do classics, you don't want to read it in English. You're going to read it in Greek. You know, I want to read Homer, you know, in the original. So there we are. I could really get into that actually. While I was at uni, I just thought, wow, I could really go for this. You know, I had to kind of pull back. Don't get, you know, keep calm, you know, just walk away. Just don't look at it again. Just, you know, keep doing what you're doing. Keep focused. Don't get distracted. But gosh, I'd love to have gone and done Beowulf and Homer. That would have been awesome. There we are. So, David Ollerton, A New Mission to Wales. Seeing churches prosper across Wales in the 21st century. David Ollerton, Wales-wide. Have you heard of this before? Do you know who David Ollerton is?
Yeah, he's Andrew Ollerton's dad.
How is he?
Who wrote the Bible course. That's very big in churches. Lots of churches use it as a study, don't they? And a way of and a mission tool. In fact, I'd say it's probably the most popular thing after the Alpha course, isn't it? The Bible course.
We're doing the Bible course at the moment, actually.
Well, that's David's son.
Right. There we are. David Ollerton. A friend of mine is the vicar of Andrew Ollerton and complains that Andrew Ollerton never answers his messages. There we are. So David Ollerton says, churches that are relational, not formal in their life, contemporary in their style, centrifugal in their mission, are the churches that are growing both numerically and in their influence. Now, I can't remember if it came up. There's a woman called Anne Douglas who did some work on society. I think she was a sociologist. And Anne Douglas wrote a very interesting thing. Sorry, I'm trying to do an email.
I've ordered this David Ollerton book. Apparently, it was the book arose out of his PhD that he did at Chester University.
All right.
And apparently, it's got a lot of data sets in it, which I thought might help us. That's why I ordered the book. So I'll let you know, Lauren, everybody else, if you have got, because it apparently did target entirely Wales, and he's from an evangelical background apparently, and most of his samples were of evangelical churches in Wales, which obviously I have a knowledge of.
So I did a thing about enculturation, about the culture of church. Oh man, I can't find it.
The problem with these books is that they make bland statements, like the first sentence. They don't give you any evidence for it. And that I find very, very off-putting.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the book's got footnotes in it to the empirical evidence, Blevin.
Oh,
I'll let you know.
oh, thank you. Excuse me, I'm going to get my iPhone. I need to increase my hearing aids. Excuse me.
Well, the thing which is pertinent to this is that Douglas makes this assertion about formality. Now, he says churches are relational, not formal. Those aren't actually a dichotomy. Formal is opposed to informal or spontaneous. Relationality is opposed to, I don't know, individualism, autonomy, something like that. So you're not looking there as a dichotomy, you're looking there at two different sort of things. But he actually asserts the idea of not formal. Now, the thing which I was trying to find, which I can't find, is a mission which was done in South America with a tribe of Indians who all became Christians. And this tribe of Indians became very formal in their worship. They had a highly structured liturgical form. And the reason was that the Indians who all became Christians were very, very coherent as a group. They were strongly interrelated physically and emotionally. They all believed very, very similar things. They all had a very similar Christian faith. There's very little deviation. And they had a very tight coherence as a group. And I think it was Anne Douglas was talking about the grid and the group. So the grid is the formation of the worldview. In her anthropological analysis, then, the grid of a community is the coherence of their worldview, which includes ethics, morals, their understanding of the world around them, and all that kind of thing, how all that integrates. And what she called group was the degree to which the community cohered as a social entity, as a group. So she said that in a high grid, high group environment, where there's a high degree of consensus about right and wrong, good and evil, reality and non-reality, and that kind of thing, and in a place where people have a strong sense of coherence as a group, you'll get formality. So 16th century England, for example, during the Reformation, it was highly contentious, the grid, in other words, whether to be Catholic or Protestant. But once formed, the Anglican Church had a very strong grid, had a very definite sense of itself and its values and its norms, its philosophy and everything else. And it had a very strong sense of coherence as well. The country had a high sense of coherence. And basically the rulers demanded a high sense of coherence. Either you fell into line or you were in trouble. And so in that environment, you had a very formal style of worship, of church. However, in the 21st century, we have a low grid, low group environment, in that there's very little consensus about anything, actually. Everything's up for grabs. And there's also a very weak sense of group. People are highly individual in their thinking, in their actions and emotional life, and will resent, if you like, the imposition of something else apart from themselves. And therefore, in that environment, she says the predictor is that you'd value spontaneity and informality over formality and order. So what he's describing then is he's saying that a formal church, a highly liturgical, highly formal kind of environment, would therefore be emotionally jarring to the majority of people nowadays. They'd find it hard to relate to intellectually and emotional. What do you reckon?
Well, if that's the explanation of it, then they're showing intolerance, aren't they? They can't relate to something.
Well, whether they're intolerant or not, it's whether they're angry with us for doing it or not. Most of them, they just kind of look at us and think, oh, whatever you want, and then ignore it.
Can you explain what the grid and the group is again, please?
The grid is the system of the worldview with ethics,
Worldview,
morals, and the way that the world is interpreted.
yeah,
And the group is the degree of social coherence,
right.
and therefore social conformity.
Oh, that makes sense, doesn't it?
So in high grid, high group,
Yeah.
tend to get a formal expression of faith. Low grid, low group, you tend to get informality.
So yeah, so obviously in very structured societies, as you said, that's logical, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, could be. Yeah. I mean, does that ring true to you? Does that sound reasonable, what I've just said?
I'm not sure. I was thinking just through it now, and you got the revival of the 1904-5
Yeah.
revival in Wales, and that wasn't there was more of a evangelical sort of charismatic sort of effect to things, wasn't there? So
I would agree that was very chaotic. It's very spontaneous.
spontaneous, yeah. But then that came out of very traditional, didn't it? It was traditional, and then eventually it just burst out in that way.
If you think about it, what was there before was very formal, and what came immediately
Mm.
afterwards was also pretty formal. So the actual revival itself was a kind of outbreak of spontaneity surrounded by formality. But it didn't last. And the revival was over by, how long did it last?
A year.
Yeah, I mean, that was it.
But there was a certain formality to it because there were areas of Wales where there were no criminal cases to try, and the
Oh yeah,
judges
no, it's a genuine, there's a
Yeah.
real turning of hearts. Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things I heard was that in the coal mining places, because the men had repented and become basically more gentle and more considerate, they stopped abusing the pit ponies. So instead of swearing at them, beating them, they'd start to ask them nicely to do what they needed to do. And then the pit ponies were just confused. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I heard that one too. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you had there was formality, but I think, in relation, to today, it might seem quite formal, but I think back then it was a real change, wasn't it? Where women were allowed to take, the front, the helm. So it was quite,
As a society, though, it's quite a formal society. In that, no, well, I don't know anyone that's alive in 1904, but I mean, I'm thinking of people that typically grew up before World War II. Have you known many of them?
no.
If you've met many people that grew up before World War II, you'll notice there's a difference in their kind of outlook to the ones.
Oh yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah.
One of the things I've noticed is that men that grew up before World War II, whatever their station in life, nearly always wear a tie. I mean, basically, they were more formally dressed. So, the bricklayer that built my house wore a tight shirt and tie to work as a bricklayer.
And they took their hats off in church.
Yeah, they would wear a hat, yeah.
I went round to St. David's Cathedral last year, going around, and there was loads of men who had their woolly hats on. So it was cold, didn't take them off. I took my cap off.
Well, I always feel self-conscious because I wear a hat, especially on holiday if I'm in somewhere warm. But if I go into a church, I do take it off. So,
But then again, we're unusual in world faiths in that we wear our shoes in church.
yeah,
Most other faiths, you take your shoes off when you go into the holy space.
yeah.
That's quite an eye opener when you go somewhere else.
Yeah. So, what about the next point? Expectations of the miraculous and the Spirit's present work would seem to be a key ingredient of mission.
Well, as I said, knowing that I know that he wrote this book having basically just followed evangelical churches, that would be something you would expect in evangelical churches. Whether it's something you'd expect in church in Wales, Anglican services is a different matter, I would have thought.
Well, you get evangelical churches which are cessationist, so they might dispute the idea of expectations of the miraculous.
No, I'm just talking generally.
Yeah.
statistically.
Charismatic evangelical churches would expect that, yeah. So HTB type, New Frontiers, Vineyard, they'd all expect that kind of thing. They'd all be into that.
This is pandering to sensationalism, though, isn't it? I mean, this would be a key ingredient of films, is sensationalism, the miraculous, the shocking, etc.
Well, that is a threat, isn't it? That is, I mean, that's one of my kind of problems with some churches, is they do seem to be sensationalist. So how can you reconcile what you might call the authentic work of the Spirit with I don't know, how would you put it? How would you not get drawn then into emotivism and sensationalism and sort of showmanship and stuff?
Well, I couldn't find a video of David, but his sermons are online. I'm not saying I listen to a lot, but I started to listen one, and it sort of hits on this. He received, he thought, the gift of speaking in tongues. So he started speaking in tongues. But then he had a crisis about it. And he wondered he might have been making it up himself. Mm-hmm. And he stopped doing it because he was scared it wasn't from God. And he couldn't establish to himself whether it was a gift of the Spirit or whether he was just making it up in his head.
Yeah.
So I think that's, that's a realistic approach that, many people face, isn't it?
I mean, Andrew Wilson, in that video we saw with him talking to, who was he talking to? Was it Glenn Scrivener? But Andrew Wilson, the guy that wrote for New Frontiers, who wrote that book, Eucharismatic, he was talking about what he calls the levels of, how do you describe it? When talking about prophetic words, for example, he'd want a high level of correlation before taking something seriously. Whereas with something like tongues, he'd say, well, you've got a low level of correlation. It doesn't really matter whether you do or not then. Whether it's you inventing it or not doesn't make that much difference. But if you say to someone, I've got a word from God that you've got to sell your house and give all your money to me, then you've got to have a pretty high level of certainty about that before you actually give that to someone.
I can't understand the purpose of it, really, because when the disciples spoke in tongues, people of all nationalities could actually understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
And if you can't understand what they were saying, well, is that really a message from the Spirit?
Well, Paul does address that in one of the epistles.
Yes, I realise St. Paul was keen on being careful about that.
And he points out that it's a sign, basically, to unbelievers. That sometimes you'll have a word that seems to be unintelligible or in no known language, but occasionally someone will actually have an interpretation from God about what it actually means.
Well, you'll always wait for an interpretation if there is a message in tongues.
Yeah.
And I've never heard somebody speak in tongues and there hasn't been an interpretation.
Yeah. What about the idea of expectation? I mean, do you think that's important in itself? And if you don't expect God to be present, or you do expect God to be present, does that make any difference?
Well, in terms of orthodox expectation, you should think he's present because he's everywhere, in a sense. And
there'd be the, if you like, the omnipresence of God, which is, if you like, a kind of philosophical truism. But apart from that, the expectation would be that somehow God would be interactive in a certain circumstance. That they're actually expecting something from God, or expecting God to be manifest in some way.
Probably wrong to expect it, isn't it? You know, shouldn't expect it. Like you said, you know, that God will interact with us. You know, it's if he does, he does, but we should not expect him to do anything.
In the gospel accounts, there are times where it says Jesus marveled at their lack of faith. And because of that, he could hardly do anything. So do you think that would be something to do with the expectation, that in places where people had a lot of faith, they have a lot of expectation, and therefore Jesus would do a lot more in the way of the miraculous and the signs and the wonders? Whereas in other places where people don't have much faith, where he marvels at their lack of faith, that would somehow dampen down what he was able to do.
I mean, there may be a correlation there between, you know, as you said, communities who do have faith, but going and expecting a miraculous intervention. I'm not on board with that.
No.
I think it's all part of the materialism that pervades everything since the Renaissance, isn't it? Really, that nothing has a miraculous explanation. Nothing is extra of this world. Everything has a physical cause and effect. That's, let's face it, is how most people are taught at school now, and that is how they expect the world to operate. So, you know, if you're going out in the mission field, you're basically, you know, approaching people that their entire worldview is of a materialistic nature. Cause and effect, we're just made of atoms. You know, there is nothing spiritual in the universe. It's just, you know, lumps of chemicals that just coalesce together for no particular reason, hang around for a while, and then disintegrate back into the component parts. There is no spirit. There is no other world.
The answer to that, you see, is that it's a philosophical nonsense because you're proving a negative, which you can't.
Yes, I can.
But you also get the sort of paradox now where in this materialistic world, people become increasingly irrational in their convictions.
Indeed, they do.
Yeah. Mm.
So, I mean, the reason for Wimber's missiology was that he interacted with people who had been in mission in the world in places where people did have what you might call a supernatural worldview, where they expected there to be a supernatural dimension to life, where they were not strictly materialistic. And therefore, if something happened, like someone got ill or had some bad luck, they'd expect some kind of spiritual dimension to that event.
Mm.
And
wouldn't actually look for that or expect
it. And you've got to understand, this is a very new phenomena. You know, this has only been the prevailing situation for 150 years.
Yeah.
Greeks, Romans, and everybody for 4,000 or 5,000 years did not have a materialistic worldview.
No.
Most humans that have ever lived had a completely spiritual worldview, that there were other forces beyond the physical.
Yeah. And of course,
and play all the time.
The material world has been vaguely unreal. That the material reality around them is not actually fully real. That what is real is the spiritual thing behind all that. So an essential element then is to calibrate the mission appropriately to a particular locality and context. The nature of mission must not be a copy for another situation or era where a particular approach was deemed effective. This is particularly true with new churches or church plants which do not have the benefit of long-standing loyalties or connections in the community. Mission has to be tailor-made. What do you reckon?
He's a bit definite about that, isn't he? Why the must? Well, give me the evidence for why the must. and you can convert that into pandering to people's particular desires at the time. A group of
Well, this is
individuals.
kind of congruent with the idea of the relationality.
I can understand all that, but I'm being negative. I don't like such obvious positive statements. Put in the evidence for them. Gonna get that.
Think of it as rhetoric, not science, though, then.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, theology is a lot of rhetoric. Oh, Jeremy, yes, I've sort of been a bit slow to learn that, but I think you're right.
I can't see how you could possibly hope to offer a tailor-made model within a church structure such as the church in Wales that has bishops and sees and all the rest of it. It's entirely structured on the basis that the product is uniform. If anybody tries to get outside uniformity, they're jumped on from a great height, in my experience. If anybody tries to change any bit of the liturgy or anything, you've got archdeacons, you've got bishops, you've got archbishops. The structure is there to provide a uniform product. It's not there for any other reason.
It's the
there is reams and reams and reams of this is all you're allowed to do.
it's the ethos of McDonald's. Because the whole point of McDonald's was, whichever town you went to, it would always be exactly the same. You knew exactly what you're getting if you went to McDonald's. Whereas if you go to independent diners in different towns, you never know what you're going to get. It could be anything.
Well, that's my point.
So, yeah.
I can't see how the church in Wales could offer a tailor-made product.
I mean, you do get special dispensations, don't you, from higher up?
Special dispensations from what? The darn rules that say you can't.
I remember in our last bishop, John Davis, not the one we've got now, he sent, for want of a better word, an encyclical. I mean, he used to write to us like the Pope writing his encyclicals. And he wrote to us an encyclical detailing to us the proper order for snuffing candles at the end of a service. I just kind of ignored it, to be honest. I don't really care how they snuff the candles. So. But
I mean, like, for example, St. Mike's in Aber are doing something quite different to many of the churches in the area. And I said, I rang up and I said, how can you get away with it? And he said, the person I spoke to said, well, basically, if you've got other churches in the area who offer the, as you say, Tim, the product, there is some ability to do something different, and you can get special permission to do it. But there has to be, if it's the only church in the area, it'd be more difficult.
yeah, Stuart Bell told me that. So I was asking him kind of how to get things going. And he said one of the reasons they could do it in St Michael's and Aberystwyth was because there's like 3 other churches in Aberystwyth. So when they started doing what they did there, the people in Aberystwyth could go to one of the other churches. Whereas he says if you haven't actually got any others, then you can't really do that in the same way.
Yeah. Mark Ansell told me the same thing, basically.
Is he the present incumbent
now? So he's on sabbatical at the moment, but he was the lead. Well, not the lead vicar or anything, but I'm not sure his title, but he's on sabbatical at the moment.
Right. I mean, do you think the McDonald's approach is better, or do you think we should be highly contextual and localized? I mean, should we push against the boundaries given to us by the Church in Wales? And what boundaries do you think we would need to cross to make it tailor-made?
Need to allow the Holy Spirit to be present. Yeah, I mean, sorry, I know the argument goes, yeah, of course, he's definitely present there. But I mean, I just find it difficult when services are so structured. And I go to a structured service. I do. I go to more of a evangelical service, and I go to more of a structured service. But I just find that we're not always listening to what to do if we want to change things up a bit.
I heard about someone, an Anglican incumbent in the 70s, I think it was, who was part of the renewal then. And he said that they always did morning prayer for their Sunday service, which is, I think, quite common then.
Mm.
And he said the Spirit used to fall on them while they were singing the Te Deum. So that was a full-on 1662 matins,
Fair enough.
where they're actually singing the Te Deum, and that was when the Spirit fell on them.
Yeah. I just think sometimes when the structured, church services, I'd like to see a bit of change, just sit and feel what the Spirit is doing, not being afraid to embrace it, to change the liturgy a little bit. I know, as Tim said, they'll come down you from a great height if you did that. So how do you get, if you want to do something different, you can't always do it, can you?
What precisely would you want to do?
Well, at the beginning of a service, rather than going straight into the confession absolution, and the Gloria, and after that, I think you should take time to sit down and to think and to see what the order could be. Maybe the order might be changed up slightly. Maybe there's an important message on the heart of the priest that he wants to speak first. Maybe he wants to do something depart slightly from the order, perhaps into a sort of meditative exercise. Just freshen it up just every now and then, allow. So we were open to differences.
If that's very unpredictable, how's everyone supposed to know what to do?
Because he would just guide you in the front, wouldn't he?
And one of the reasons, for example, if I've been to charismatic type churches, although nominally speaking, they describe their services as informal, in real life, they tend to follow a very, very similar pattern each week. That it's pretty predictable what would actually happen in the order it would happen in. So what would vary would be the songs they'd choose and the Bible reading that we read out, and obviously the words of the message would be different. But the kind of order of events is almost nearly always the same.
True. Yeah. Yeah. And
I've noticed is that when people are extemporizing prayer, for example, they tend to be lots of and situation. Whereas if you're reading prayers, they're often a bit more articulately put.
And I'd agree, and I'd say that they're not immune to anything I'm saying either. I'd just like to see a little bit more change and variety. But
you just want novelty, is that it? You just want to feel something.
No. I just no, just sitting there and feeling what's going on, rather than let's open the book, let's read straight out. This is what we're going to do today. I just want that sitting down, or 5 minutes of just being present, rather than just reading stuff out and
well, I mean, you could announce silence at the start of the service. So right, everyone, we're beginning. Right, everyone, sit down, shut up, stop talking, pay attention, and hold your silence.
No.
But isn't there scope to do things like that within the week of the church? For example, I know the Minster does do more spiritual work. They do Lectio Divina and things, and while they still offer the traditional services, this is being built in additionally, not just on a Sunday. And I think the intention is to make more people present in their faith throughout the week rather than just a Sunday duty. And I mean, I know we have a more spiritual service, and when once a month it is slightly more charismatic, and the unpredictability of that scares people, and people purposely don't come for that. And what I saw the first time that happened is that people felt trapped by it. So if you are going to do something like that, then you want to give people some notice, because if somebody comes up to you and say, I've got a word for you from God, the chances are they might not want to hear that. And I think there is a potential for a lot more infighting and arguments if that started to be the norm, where once a month, there was some slight unpredictability. Because I know that, speaking to somebody who went to a charismatic church, and I'm not quite sure of this myself because it's not something that I have a lot of experience with, but she said if somebody is doing something like prophecy or speaking or encouraging people to speak in tongues, you have to get people's permission to do that.
Okay.
So, but that was her experience of going to a charismatic church, and she said if they were doing spirit work, then people had to give their permission for that, not being forced on them. Because to be quite honest with you, I have heard somebody speak tongues at the end of their sermon, and there was no interpretation. And to be quite honest with you, when he went la la la, I nearly laughed, because it was just not
Right.
he was just speaking in what he said was tongues, and then in one of the words was la la la. I was like, oh, I had to leave soon afterwards, because it's just like part of that laughing was I wasn't expecting to hear that. And also, I don't believe that you can just come out and speak in tongues. I mean, in my experience,
When you say you can, do you mean it's not possible, or you mean you can't do it with integrity, or do you mean that it's not proper?
I don't know. I'm very undecided. I don't think the way that this person is speaking about gifts of the Spirit is proper. And that is because he is putting so much emphasis on tongues. Like every time he speaks about the gifts of the Spirit, we end up coming back to how important tongues is. And he asserts that it's the language of heaven, and we can't argue against him, because yes, it is. It's where I always thought that I've never really given it much thought, because I always thought God would provide the answer for what the language in heaven was. I mean,
12.
yeah, it is. But he's adamant that it's tongues, and we all should want to speak tongues, and we all should speak tongues. And
Sounds quite 80s, actually. I used to hear that kind of thing in the 80s a bit.
yeah, it's just bizarre, but it's really forceful. And I know it has
I think
hurt
Paul
people.
Paul dealt with that in the letter to the Corinthians, didn't he? He said, if you don't do it with love, you're just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal.
He also said that God's a God of order, not disorder.
I mean, people don't realize it, but that bit in Corinthians is actually an admonishment as to the way the Corinthians were using the gifts, wasn't it? People don't read it like that. They think it's all about love, and it isn't really. It's nothing to do with love.
He says,
I don't read it out of weddings and everything, but it's basically Paul getting his hair off that they're misbehaving in Corinth.
Yeah. And one thing which I do appreciate since becoming ordained is that when I'm actually saying liturgy, I'm kind of chewing over the words as I say them. For me, it's almost like eating something. I'm kind of savoring each word as it comes. So when it's bad liturgy, like common worship, I want to spit it out and gag. So I think it's disgusting. I think it's rubbish. But if it's good liturgy, like 1662, then I love it. I'm into it. So when I'm saying that, I'm really into it. I'm with the Spirit, man. I'm just going. Devices and desires of our own hearts. And I think, wow, awesome. Yeah, bring it on. But
Now we're taking what you're saying, Lauren, and in established, churches and communities, I think you'd have a bigger job, and if the needs are being met in the church already, there wouldn't be a big crying out for change too much. But yeah, I mean, in new either fresh expressions or maybe in a community or a new community of people or a new area or a church, you just who may be more open to that sort of idea of
I've actually
changing
started
things up.
a prayer meeting in Gilwyn. Pleasant hasn't heard this yet because it's not a very big one yet. But in Gilwyn, in the hall, I started an informal prayer meeting on Sunday evenings every fortnight, because every fortnight they also have what they call Tell Us, a kind of committee thing. So when the hall hasn't got them in it, then we do this. And it's just been a handful of us because I just wanted to pray with someone. And what I've noticed is that we began completely unstructured, without any structure whatsoever. We just met together and we prayed, and then occasionally we sang a bit. And as time has passed, it's become kind of floppy. We actually need to have some kind of framework. We need to give some kind of shape to this thing to stop it from just becoming flaccid. And so I've kind of observed that over the last few weeks, as it gradually, as time has passed, the initial excitement and happiness of the informality of it's gradually worn off. And now I think we're actually beginning to need a bit of structure. It's beginning to become repetitive and shapeless and lacking in direction. And I think a little bit of structure could help give it that form and that direction, which otherwise it lacks. And that's something I'm going to have to gently broach with people. But this I want to actually grow into an evening service on a Sunday, which is not as formal or liturgically formal as the other services we offer. Because at the moment, we don't actually have any more spontaneous, more contemporary feeling services in any of our churches at all, actually. The nearest you got to that is Crick Carroll, and they're hardly spontaneous. Everything's very tightly governed there. So I've been thinking for quite a while, we need to have something that's not like the rest of our churches. And so, but it can't rest on just one person. So I've been fishing around trying to find other people who are up for it so that I can actually share the responsibility for it with them. So that if one of us doesn't turn up, it will still carry on. So we're gradually moving towards that, Brethren. You can come if you like, Brethren, now that you know. We're meeting this Sunday. And but it'll basically be just a moment, informal prayer and worship with a view towards encouraging each other spiritually. It's an opportunity for us to pray for one another and bless one another and minister to one another, but also that in the long term, it will grow into something public. It'll be a different form of service which we can invite people to. And frankly, what the bishop says about it, I don't really care. I'm just going to do it. I mean, I'm going to do Sunday morning communions just like everyone expects. So this is something else.
That's the spirit, Jeremy. That's the spirit.
I don't know where you'd go to church, Stephanie, but have you thought about maybe starting up? We call them connect groups, but I think a term is house group, where you just get together and like-minded people and you try that yourselves.
Okay. Not like a cell group, do you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And also, I don't know if you have lay worship leader services, but what you're talking about is something that could be built into a lay worship, to a service that is led by the lay worship leaders, because I know that there was in my first year of doing theology for life, there was somebody called Jeremy, and he was in Monmouth, and he's now an ordinand, but he was saying all the different once a month when they did their family services, they would do all these informal greetings. Like, for example, the priest would say a welcome, Jesus welcomes you to this space, and she would go through, whether you're in the mountaintop or whether you're in the valley, Jesus welcomes you. So there is scope to do things like that, but I think it's just when you start going down the more charismatic thing, people do get scared.
What I found was that Sunday mornings isn't a good place to experiment. because you have the regulars turn up and they get freaked out if you do anything a bit weird. So you need to find another slot to experiment. And I think everyone has to agree. I think that's the essential thing. People need to agree on it. Because we tried various formats of family service in Galway. And what we found was we put a lot of effort into doing something which the kids could turn up to and join in with. And all the regular congregation just kind of stood in horrified silence watching and just kind of glazed expressions on their faces. And and after a while, we thought this isn't working because the kids have got no interest in these old people. And the old people have got no interest in these kids. They just kind of, it was such a lot of work. In the end, we just stopped doing it. And I said to the old people, as it were, I said, well, what would you like to do for the first Sunday? If it's not going to be a communion service, what kind of words would you actually like to have? Because there's all the pressure is on to make them more contemporary and more spontaneous, more informal, all this kind of stuff, more modern language. I said, what would you actually like to have? And they kind of looked at each other a bit embarrassed and said, actually, we like the old words. It's what we used to. So I made a booklet with morning prayer in the old words, and that's what they use. So, and that was simply in response to the request of the congregation. Because anyway.
I mean, as a basic thing, you've got to recognise. I mean, this is not going down an individual route, but I mean, Myers-Briggs breaks people down into 42 different types of learning or things that appeal to them, INGFs or whatever. Then anybody who's a teacher will tell you in any class you're going to have kinetic learners, visual learners, audio learners. So, I mean, if you're in a church environment and you're trying to impart information and knowledge, you've got to recognize that people take that knowledge in different ways. And unless you try and communicate in different ways, there's going to be people, a large percentage, that are going to just be entirely switched off. I mean, I still find it quite surprising that I would say the church in Wales now is probably the only churches that I go into regularly that don't have screens, full stop. Every other church now will always have screens with the hymns on it, the words on it, and which a preacher will be able to use as a display aid. I know Blethen doesn't like that, but a lot of people do. And that's not even a basic tool in a lot of Church in Wales churches, is it? You've still got the hymn books.
Yeah. Well, actually, they'd put a screen up in the hall in Gilwell. And I've been trying to work out what size to make it. So I'm thinking about 10 foot wide.
Yeah.
So that will give us a nice big picture if we're showing a movie or something. But then also we can use it for words and hymns and whatever else on. But the problem then is the projector. That at the moment it stands on a table in the middle of the hall. So ideally you want it wired in, coming down from the ceiling, but that's really expensive to install.
Every pub's got one. Can't be that hard.
They got money.
So's the Church in Wales, billions.
They're not going to spend it on a projector for us, though. They're not going to buy us a hard-wired projector fixed to the ceiling. So mission-shaped church. If a church is shaped by its mission, then the church needs to be tailor-made for its locality and context. Some common themes or expressions of church are the importance of small groups and relational mission. These churches do not always meet on Sunday in response to large changes in society and lifestyle in recent decades. Churches relate to a particular network of people, workplace, school, etc. Churches tend to be post-denominational, although leadership is often part of a denomination. New Christians will have very limited denominational identity. I mentioned to someone the other day about the need for a big church in Swansea. And he said, we don't need big churches, we need lots and lots and lots of small groups. He said, look at the church in Iran. There's no big churches there, there's millions of small groups. Look at the church in China, not many big churches, if any, lots and lots and lots of small groups. Is that a realistic or fair or practical comment about mission in the UK?
Well, it could well be where it ends up. But they'd have to abandon the entire parish system, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
We
Is that
have
going to work? I mean, if you think about Iran and China, both those countries are places where being publicly seen as a Christian can result in a criminal conviction, and therefore it's forced into secrecy. So the fact that it's not actually criminal to be a Christian here, does that make that much difference when it comes to mission?
The point I'm making is it's being forced from the other end. It's being forced from the institution that it cannot maintain its parish structure. It does not have the manpower to man the parishes anymore,
No.
and therefore will have to go to a dispersed system with less full-time paid clergy. I'm not saying it's been forced by an oppressive regime. I'm saying that is coming out of the church's own structure. It can't maintain itself. It's like a star. It's going to create a black hole. It's going to implode on itself.
What about churches in the UK which are growing? What model, what pattern do they tend to have?
I think contemporary style worship. Waterfront Church in Swansea in one. They're quite small.
Is that growing?
I don't know. I mean, there was loads of people when I went, gosh, about 15 years ago. I used to attend. I was shopping around for a church at the time. There was loads of people there. So I don't know what it's like these days, to be honest.
Like how many? Like 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000?
150 perhaps. I thought it was quite a lot. It was packed out anyway.
Well, it's big for Swansea, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that's that big.
No.
And for a Swansea church, that's pretty big. It's definitely the upper side of Swansea churches, because I think Linden was never more than 150, and Parklands, I think, never got much bigger than that.
Yeah. It was always filled to capacity anyway. It was a bit like the God Channel sometimes. On the front, the stage and the purple stage and the lights and the keyboard and stuff. And yeah, and individual small churches. That's the way I was thinking.
I mean, we have a similar one in Wrexham, which is a HTB plant, Hope Street in Wrexham. That's become very popular. As you say, hundreds, it's growing, and they're going into schools as well. But that was a HTB plant. All the leaders got trained. They identified, obviously, Wrexham being the biggest town in Flintshire. Well, it's not technically in Flintshire. And, they built it from there, and it works. That's very popular. Not Church in Wales. We have a place called Audacious, which is...
Take Hope Street, though. That is part of the Church in Wales, isn't it?
It is Church in Wales, but they effectively sat down and decided they needed to follow the HTB model.
Yeah.
So, the ministers all went and got trained up, and, they built it from there.
Yeah. Now, so how many people meet on a Sunday there?
Oh, yeah, it's a couple of hundred.
And how many small groups are there?
I don't know, because I've never practically gone myself. I know people who go. I mean, I've been to a few HTB churches, HTB itself. So I don't know what the worship's like, I must say. But I know it's very popular. But then again, I'd say that's basically pulling Anglicans from other churches in the area. They do pull a lot, and they do a lot of work. In Wrexham, there's a big council estate called Kaya Park. Used to be called Queen's Park, but obviously if something's got a bad reputation, you can solve it overnight by changing its name. It's now called Kaya Park, and I know they get an awful lot from there as well. You know, they do some fantastic work in the community. You know, it's not just come to us sort of a church. It's out in the community and building that way. So I should think its roots are quite deep now, all over Wrexham.
As far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's possible to build discipleship without small groups.
No,
I don't think you can do it. You know, Sunday meetings just can't do that. You have to have small groups. So if you can't get people to turn up to small groups, they're not going to, as far as I'm concerned, they're not really going to grow.
I could never understand how you could do church just on a Sunday. I was always a member of a house group, and I always much preferred the house group to church on a Sunday.
Yeah, I tended to as well.
You know, it just made a lot more sense to me. You know, you meet in somebody's house, you have a meal, you get the Bible out, and you chat around the table. I mean, to me, that's what the sort of church was I was reading about in the Bible. You know, there was nothing in the Bible that said, you know, a bloke swings a big perfume canister about and somebody walks about with a cross in front of them and you stand up, sit down, and then you get blessed and then you go out. It never struck me. I always found that a bit, you know, nice things happened on a Sunday, but to me, the community of the church to me was in the house group. That's where you learnt about people. There wasn't enough time in a church on a Sunday.
I agree.
But also it's really interesting because there isn't a vicar there or the formal figure, you get to know people's opinions on the Bible and what they think, and they're freer with their questions. Because I know with my own house group, there were a lot of ladies of a certain age, and they said when they were young and they were going to church, they could never ask these questions that they were asking me, because they ask a lot of questions because I'm doing theology for life, and I was explaining it to them, and they said they wouldn't dare, you know, dare ask anybody, you know, when they were younger, these questions. But, you know, now that they have me and they've had all these questions all their life and they've never felt safe enough to not be called stupid or silly or, you know, why do you think that? To ask them. And I think it's incredibly freeing and beneficial for people's faith because it helps them develop the confidence to worship and believe in their own way and have a personal relationship with the Bible, which is integral to faith.
Yeah, you don't need to persuade me of that. Yeah. And actually, it's my vineyard house group which kept me sane while I was at St. Michael's, because I was being sort of shuffled around my various placement churches, which at times got a bit odd. I mean, for the first 2 years, I didn't go to a single Anglican church which actually used an Anglican liturgy. Every placement church I went to used the Roman Missal on Sundays. So I got to know the Roman Missal quite well, but I didn't really know much of the Anglican liturgy. But what about it says these churches do not always meet on Sunday? Now, this is where I've got an issue, because to my mind, for example, we've got the Chosen and the now doing the Bible course. Now, that's a large group of people meeting, but it hasn't actually become a church, and it hasn't become, if you like, self-sustaining. The only reason it can exist is because there's already a church which basically supports it. So to my mind, a church, if it's going to be called that, has to be something that's somehow self-perpetuating. It's not drawing on the resources or support infrastructure of something else. So if it's not going to meet on Sunday, what's it drawing on? I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible. I mean, Seventh-day Adventists, for example, meet on Saturdays, but they do meet together once a week. So when it comes to the whole fresh expressions question, or if they're not actually, because in real life, the people that actually run the church, the ones that actually do the giving, which actually keeps paying the bills, the ones that actually undertake the offices, such as being warden, treasurer, whatever else you need to actually function, they go on Sundays. And it's that pool of people that are committed to turning up on Sunday that actually keep everything going. So it may, in some respects, be a bit arbitrary, but to my mind, the health of the church really seems to be on who turns up on Sunday. If no one's turning up on Sunday, then you know the wheels are about to drop off.
Well, I agree with you for different reasons. I mean, I just think, whether you like it or not, Sunday morning is still the quietest time of the week. You try and organise things any other time of the week, people have so many different commitments. They have a million and one things to do, depending on whether they've got school-age kids, this club, that club, the other club. To be honest, the quietest time of the week, you only have to check the roads, is a Sunday morning. And I think, we should never give that up, because I can assure you they'll fill it with something else. If there isn't a commitment that that is the day people should be going to church, whether they do or don't is a different matter. The minute you vacate that space, I can assure you it'd be filled by something else.
Yeah. What about the idea of a network of people? So I presume that's somehow niching it, that it's a certain type of people that will turn up who are of a similar kind then, in some way, got something in common apart from that, and will therefore somehow cohere better as a congregation. What about the nationality-based churches? So in the West London, for example, there's entire churches which are entirely populated by people from one province in India. Or you get people like Nigerian churches in London, or Ghanaian churches in London, or Ugandan churches. Or Chinese churches, or Korean churches. I mean, how far down that road should we go? Should we be aiming for a universal one, or should we be aiming for a kind of niche sector type congregations?
Well, as it said on the previous page, you can't operate on a one-size-fits-all, because different groups have different things that is important to them. I mean, birds of a feather flock together, it's...
But in that thing about the screw tape I sent out, it said that in that church, he said the only thing holding them together was what you might call mere Christianity. And that in itself defined the fact that it was a church, and that's what they had in common.
What if you had like a ministry, in the ministry area, you had priests of different sort of different groups, and that they go around like circles going around each church, each preaching, rotational, so they get an exposure then to different views of the church.
So you're talking about a kind of rota system then, where you just rotate preachers.
Yeah, like not itinerant preacher type things, but like a rotational thing.
And we have a rota, necessarily. We have different people coming through in different churches on different weeks. My own experience is that tends to run down the congregations, actually. It would seem that if you have a kind of continuity, then that seems to build the congregation up. and discontinuity seems to run it down.
Yeah. And I mean, that would be my thought anyway. I'm not necessarily agreeing with these. I'm just sort of throwing them out.
Yeah.
Just what if,
Yeah.
My first church was one operated that had 4 elders, which had to be men, and a pastor. And, I know we all worship the same God, but, you'd rock up, and if it was the one that was quite a duffer on the old preaching, as he walked in the door, you go, oh, no.
When I went to the HTV church,
like, you're looking at your watch on your way in, not the way out. It's like, oh no.
I remember when I went to the HTV church in London, they had a whole tranche of speakers who would preach, and they had different worship leaders as well. So I kind of grew to recognize the regular preachers, but I think because the church had a very strong character, the character of the church kind of was the continuity. And so the preachers they're all okay. There's nothing wrong with any of them. I only saw the actual vicar, the incumbent, like once a month, if that, once every 2 months. I remember when he first came in, he was wearing a surplice because he was going to do communion. And it looked weird. I thought, God, what's he wearing all that stuff for? I just thought it looked a bit odd. And I wasn't really that interested in the communion. I thought, come on, let's get to it. Let's do the worship. Let's have the ministry. Let's kind of. And he just wants to kind of ponce around in his clothes and his bread and wine. Oh yeah, yawn. Come on then. But if you like, the continuity was the people and I suppose the atmosphere, the culture of it. Whereas what I found is now that it's the kind of preaching ministry, to a certain extent presiding, but I think chiefly preaching, that actually builds that relationship with the congregation. And without that relationship, you can't really do much.
I don't know if it would work like, people are more used to consuming, online now, content. And if you had like a rotation, like an online type church thing with different speakers, whether some audiences might like that, so they've got it on one place, so a guest speaker might come on. I don't know, maybe they might be a bit more open to that because they don't quite have the same connection in like real life. Maybe that'd be an option.
Yeah. And I've had guest speakers through to Gilwan, like from different organisations, where they give a spin about the organisation, then give the Sunday preach. And I feel that can be quite good because it can be stimulating. They are visitors; they're doing something new and novel, and it's kind of fallen apart a bit now because the people that were coming have kind of stopped coming, have retired or moved on or whatever. And the ones we've got to find the new kind of new people to bring in, but that has worked quite well. What about this post-denominational thing? This is something I found really strong now. People are really reluctant to sign up. Really reluctant. I mean, I found it particularly with confirmation. As I say, confirmation is just being received into the Anglican Church. And there's all these people kind of in our orbit who have got a strong faith and are kind of deeply committed to what you might call the life of faith, but flatly refuse to be confirmed. So they won't join up. They won't actually become officially part of the structure. I say, but it doesn't negate anything else. It doesn't stop you going anywhere else. But if you're official, you're then part of it, then you can be properly integrated. But if you're not, you can't be properly integrated. And a lot of them just won't be won't sign up. And do you think it's important? You ever heard Jordan Peterson talking about commitment? He talks about commitment. He says the only way to actually achieve something or get anywhere is to be committed. To be committed to something means you have chosen one thing and rejected another thing. So he said in of itself, it's a kind of risk. But if you refuse to commit, you'll never actually achieve anything. You never get anywhere with anything. So I'd say we've got this almost pathological anti-commitment kind of mentality now, where a lot of people simply refuse to commit. Therefore, they can't actually achieve anything.
That's an expression of individualism.
Yeah, kind of individualism, yeah.
I suppose.
But that's across society, isn't it? I mean, it's recognised that people do not join societies
No,
as much anymore. I mean, the Working Men's Club, you know, when I was younger, was a large structured organisation that men were proud to join and be a member of a particular working men's club and had pride in that.
yeah,
That has gone within a generation. You know, the working men's club is now probably more at risk than the church, you know, simply because, you know, people don't have that, as you say, affinity to organisations anymore.
round table's another one.
Yeah, well, anything like that, really.
I mean, I'm 58, and a friend of mine wanted me to join the round table. I said, but I thought you had to be under 40 for that. He said, I'll forget that. There's no one under 40 that's even vaguely interested.
Mm.
I mean, I've been asked to join Rotary and Probus, but, well, not Probus, that's for retired people. But in theory, Rotary should be people of my age group, people that are working. But no one joins Rotary now either. It's actually the same people in Rotary and Probus.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything like that, by and large.
Um, yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's a cultural wide thing, you know.
I mean, I've always thought one of the greatest assets of Great Britain is the village hall and the ability of village halls to still form committees and still run that community asset. I mean, forget about your local politics or whatever. To me, the village hall sums up a community. If you've got a vibrant village hall that's being utilised by guides, scouts, archery club, knitters, you know, all sorts of different things, then I will tell you that that is a community that's working pretty well on all levels.
Yeah, you're probably right there. But of course,
I mean,
all those things are weakening, aren't they? I mean, I always think Mothers' Union is a very good idea, and that young women with children need moral support and could do with a bit of help and advice at times, as we see at the Tots group. You know, they need something, but there's no way they're going to join Mothers' Union. Not a chance.
but that's because they've got mums in it now.
But they don't join anything. You know, when they come to Tots, they're happy to turn up to Tots, but they won't go to each other's houses, for example, or they won't receive visitors to their houses. So they don't. Well, there we are. I think Mothers' Union struck me as particularly so because I've been really had it pushed at me just how needy some young women are with their children. how isolated they are and how they're struggling with childcare and with cooking, with clothing, with homemaking, with loneliness. And all these things can be done. The technical aspects of it are very simple. They're not complicated. Some cooking classes would be very easy to organize if someone had a mind to, if they would actually turn up. And likewise, the social network's really important, and the emotional, moral support, but they just won't join up, something like Mothers Union. And I kind of wonder why. I mean, it's a very kind of open-ended question in my mind. I just kind of think it's a kind of curiosity. I think it's partly individualism, and that they want to be on their own, they want to do their own thing, they want to be individualistic and all this kind of stuff. A lot of them are kind of between things, and that being a homemaker now is not really a career choice. Nowadays, having baby and being around with baby is a short-term thing. It's just for a few weeks or a few months, and then it's back to work. So this is just a temporary stop, which makes it all the harder on them, of course, because they're not used to it and they haven't got any structure around them for it. If they've been doing it for 5 years, they've kind of got used to it and kind of bedded in, and there are other women in the same position. But as it is, they're just fresh to it, and everybody else is fresh to it, so no one knows what to do with themselves. And it strikes me as being very unfortunate. Anyway. So attractional church demands that in order to hear the gospel, people must come to us on our turf, in our cultural zone. In effect, they must become one of us if they want to follow Christ. I can't emphasize how deeply alienating this is for most non-Christian people who are generally happy to explore Jesus but don't particularly want to be churched in the process. The biblical model, on the other hand, is not so much to bring people to church, but to take Jesus and the church to the people. How true is that? How many people really want to explore Jesus and be transformed? And to my mind, the whole point of discipleship is transformation, it's regeneration. So how many people actually really want to be regenerate in Christ?
They're probably easily put off quite early on because it isn't easy. It's not an easy option.
No, it's not.
I often think, take my yoke upon you, for it is light and light. It's not. A psychiatrist once told me that he thought that a Christian conscience was a pain in the neck. He was a Christian, but I think I so much agree with him.
Well, then I think that's the whole point of the red pill, blue pill moment in the Matrix is, do you want the blissful ignorance? Just get on with your life and don't worry about the reality of what's out there. And I think most people will take the blue pill. They're quite happy to blissfully ignorant, and they don't have to worry about guilt or sin or a day of reckoning, or there are spiritual forces at work in the world. They don't want the red pill. You take this pill, as you said, like your psychiatrist friend, it becomes a pain in the neck. To have the scales fall from your eyes and to see everything through God's eyes, then all of a sudden the world is a more realistic, difficult place to operate in.
And if you take this statement here and then think about Iran. In Iran, you've got this government which is cruel and spiteful, malicious, corrupt, and violent. And if it comes to the attention of the authorities that an Iranian Muslim has become a Christian, basically anything could happen to them. I mean, anything at all. They could be picked up, they could be beaten to death, they could be shot, they could be tortured. If it's a woman, she could be raped, she could be imprisoned indefinitely, or they might kind of ignore that. You know, it's got a kind of spontaneity about it. But basically, all bets are off. Whatever you thought about your life before, if you become known as a Christian, you can't assume anything now. Now everything changes. So would that be alienating for non-Christian people in Iran? And if you take the north of Nigeria to the Jos Plateau, where there's a vibrant Christian church, if you're a Christian, you could be murdered at any time by a Muslim. Muslims go around killing people every day up there. Every single day of the year, Christians are murdered by Muslims. How alienating is that? And it's totally directed. They are killed because they're Christians by Muslims because they're Muslims. You know, there's no ambiguity about it. I'm a Muslim, therefore I'm going to kill you because you're a Christian. You know, that's the kind of mentality that's at work.
But the question's directed at non-Christians. It says alienating for non-Christians. So, you know,
they're talking about
how do you deal with people of no faith?
But these churches draw people in, don't they? You know, the Iranian church is exploding in numbers. It's growing. You know, the Iranian authorities are closing mosques because people aren't bothering to go to mosque. And at the same time, the churches are proliferating, or the congregations are. Obviously, they're not openly proliferating, but there are millions. I don't know how many millions of Christians in Iran now. But there's a lot of it about. So how, in that environment, do people become Christians? You know, if you're threatened with your life, however inconvenient it is here socially, unlikely to be threatened with your life unless you're a Muslim.
It's like it was at the start of the Christian church, isn't it?
Yeah.
You always have to admire people who are persecuted.
So I suppose the question I'm asking is, if people don't particularly want to be churched, I'm thinking, how badly do they want to know Jesus?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, because when I became a Christian, I just wanted to know the Lord. And if it meant doing some weird thing, then I'd do it, if that's brought me close to God. I mean, obviously, if these things are just weird things, they're not actually bringing people close to God, we may as well forget them. I mean, what's the point of doing them? But if what we're doing is real, if it's godly, if it's spiritual, if we're worshipping God truly, if the Lord is truly with us, if his spirit is in us, if his presence rests upon us, if we are faithfully testifying to Christ crucified, then if people want to know the Lord, then they can come, they can participate, can't they? They can hear it, they can be part of it.
I don't think enough people know. I think if you know about Christ, you can't help but worship him. It's just nothing else you can do, really.
One thing that horrified me was the way that people become churchianized in the ordination process. And there's this young woman from Gower who I used to know before she went for ordination. And she was this nice woman. She was married, she had kids, she was friendly, she was warm, she was sociable. She wore dresses, she had bobbed hair. She was a lively kind of person. And then after she was ordained, I met her at St. Michael's and I didn't recognize her. She had cropped grey hair. She's wearing a dark suit with trousers, black shirt. I honestly didn't recognize her. I just didn't. She said after a while, "You don't recognize me, do you?" I said, "No, should I?" Dig yourself in. She said, "I'm X." I thought, "What?" I was staggered. I was horrified. What's happened to this woman? You know, she used to be nice. You know, she used to be pleasant. You know, she's become a cleric.
Not all clerics are like that.
Well, I fought against it all the way. I tell you, I'm not going to go like that. But that was definitely, you know, that churchianity, that churchianization was definitely part of some people's church membership. It was that kind of conformity to the institution, which actually has got nothing to do with Christ or the truth or the way or the life or anything. It's just churchianity. And that I found mortifying. You know, that I found appalling.
Did you make that word up? I've never heard of it before. I quite like it.
Which one?
Churchianity.
Yeah, I did make it up.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah, I needed a word.
It's a good one. That's
Yeah.
a bad case of churchianity, that is.
Oh, bad case of churchianity, that, yeah, full on.
Got a bit of churchianity, that one.
There's a
Knew him
great
before he was a
Africana word,
bishop.
meaning watch out, basop, basopa. Basop, watch out, basop, churchianity. Don't want to get there. No. So, summary of everything that's gone before. Oops. What do you reckon then? How do you feel about this? Which of these does your local church characterize? Which of these values do you think most challenge your local church?
I'm not so sure about this, about, you know, um centrifugal and mission, you know, going out rather than drawing in. I think there is a place for the attractional church. Um, Especially in stuff like the online world, because you will get people who have interests in certain things, like not necessarily Christianity, but it might be a way of attracting them into the church. Um, you know, and there are people out there, you know, you've got a much bigger base of people to attract, you know, and some will be more likely to come into the church that way than if you had a smaller community, which you wouldn't have a large enough pool of people. That's my thinking. I mean, I'm not saying it's not, you know, totally. I mean, there's obviously a place for a centrifugal in the mission, you know, but I don't think it's just one-way traffic. You know, I think there is also, you know, when was this, back in the 2011 or something? I'm not sure now. When did he write all of this?
I don't know.
You know, is it was it in a different
2016.
world? 2016. Okay.
Yeah, he died in 2017. I think
Oh,
public.
right. Okay. I mean, I think online church perhaps was in its infancy. I think since COVID, things have really taken off. So there might be a place for it. An attractional church, which could be effective.
What does this have to do with the churches we've got?
But I mean, some churches are online, aren't they? They dual sort of stream, aren't they? You've got the local congregation and you've got the online congregation. Tend not to mix two together, but
No.
they do exist.
But with that online congregation, is that online congregation actually supporting the work of the church? Or is it simply drawing on the work of the church? When I say supporting, do they supply a pool of volunteers to do stuff, and do they actually give money to pay for the bills? Or is it purely
I think some do. The regulars do contribute, and that some I know have expressed, including myself, desire to do more,
right?
but there's not usually anything. There's no sort of nothing set up for the online community to do. So the mission could be expanded in that direction. Just isn't. I think it's not well utilized. They just don't know what to do with us.
We've learned to speak of God as a missionary, us to understand the church as a sent people. So, theology for a missionary church, creation and redemption. When we speak of God, we're referring to the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who mutually indwell one another, exist in and for one another, both giving and receiving. God is a missionary God. We would not know him if he hadn't sent God out in the power of the Son, out in the power of the Spirit. The mission of God expresses itself in relationship. The Trinity is not closed in itself, it is open in outgoing movement of generosity. Creation and redemption overflow from the Trinity. The mission of God as creator is to bring into being, sustain, and perfect all creation. The mission of God as redeemer is to sustain and reconcile fallen creation. Any comment about any of that?
Seems very reasonable.
Yep. When it talks about God expressing an open, outgoing movement of generosity, where is God going out from and to?
Well, out from his everlasting Trinity to his human creation, I suppose.
Where is creation located in relative to God?
Where?
Yeah.
Planet Earth. I don't know where else.
If you think about the creation, where is it with relation to God? The whole of creation, the whole universe.
Extrinsic to him.
I'm not sure if it can be.
Although the Holy Spirit is within us, isn't it?
I mean, there's an idea of kenosis, that Son of Man emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant. So the idea of kenosis, of God emptying himself. But that's repeated in that God is God with or without creation. God doesn't actually rely on creation in order to be God. Creation is wholly contingent on God's creative action. But God actually, if you like, makes space for creation, and that God somehow creates a gap in himself so that creation is there, which is not God himself. In other words, we're not panentheistic or pantheistic. Creation is not God. Creation is something made by God. and differentiated from God. Although God is fully present throughout creation, creation itself is not actually God. So God is not, I don't think God really goes out from himself, in that creation is actually within God, if anything. You might say God holds himself back from smothering creation because he wants creation to exist. But the idea of outgoing and overflowing suggests going from one place to another, or a confined area being overly filled. But God doesn't actually ever fill up, in that he's eternal and infinite. And God doesn't actually go out, and there's nowhere for God to go out to, in that he is God. So what we see in creation is the Lord's relationship to creation, his interaction with creation, and those interactions are characterized by God's character, his goodness, his compassion, his mercy, his loving kindness, and all those various qualities which we understand to be those of God. So, there's a difference. For example, if we require grace from God, it's not a zero-sum thing, in that if God gives us grace, he doesn't, if you like, have less grace to give someone else because he's now given some grace to us. He has all the grace possible because he's God, and he can give as much grace as he wants to anyone simultaneously, because God is never depleted. Whereas if I ask Levin for a tenner, that's now a tenner that he no longer has and cannot give to anyone else. So Levin is a very, if you like, confined financial entity with limited resource. Whereas God is not confined or in any way limited in any way, actually. So there's this dialectical difference between our relationship to God and our relationship to anything else.
Yes, I think it's a one-way dependency, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's completely dependency.
Whatever else you say, it must be one-way dependency.
But it also begs sort of the Douglas Adams view on the creation, isn't it? The fact that there is a creation should make us ask the question, why is there a creation? It's about framing the question, not finding the answer. I mean, that was the whole idea of the hitchhiker, wasn't it? We should sit within creation and go, oh, why is there a creation, or why am I in it? That's surely what it's all set up for. God can't give us the answer because it'd be too easy then, wouldn't it?
Well, the answer
life, the universe, and everything. That's the game, isn't it?
But we are part of it. Now, nature is the part of creation.
Exactly. And some of us will ask the question, and some of us won't.
Yes, I can warm to Tim's opinion. I've thought that myself. Why there should be. I think you're absolutely right, Tim.
Well, why should there be something instead of nothing? God didn't need us, as Jeremy said. He didn't need. He had no great need of us, but he chose to, as Jeremy said, make that space within himself for creation to exist, for creation to sit there and go, why am I here?
Like a pearl in.
What is the purpose of this?
Just nestled there like a pearl inside an oyster.
Yeah.
Well, the classic explanation is if he made creation out of love, in order to give. I suppose you can see that as a reasonable model.
Yeah, there's definitely that aspect of character involved in it. Yeah.
And I feel, well, Tim, you're right as well about in saying that if we were told everything, it would be too easy. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've always felt that way. It wouldn't exercise the imago Dei in us, I suppose.
Well, we know the answer. It's 42, but that's not interesting, is it?
No.
The interesting question is working out why.
Oh. Well, there's some things you just can't know, I'm afraid.
Good.
So it's incarnation. So how does incarnation relate to mission then? How might you paraphrase the idea of incarnation?
Well, if you have a parallel with Christ, then it is making God real so that humans can understand him.
Yeah.
I wonder when all that started, because often evolution, I always think, is one of the mechanisms God used to create us. And when did we first start to understand? Presumably when we got evolved into a big enough brain, think about all these possibilities. And I've read a paper in Nature that there's a place in France where were caves which were inhabited by Homo neanderthalis, the Neanderthal man, for tens of thousands of years. And the very oldest ones had they had arrangements where stalagmites from the surface, from the ceiling,
Stalagmites grow up from the ground.
stalagmites, yeah, had been broken down and put into regular structures, almost like a worship structure. And you just wonder when that really happened. You can see this pattern of formation brought about by God. At least I believe that's how it happened. And we had enough brain power to actually understand the mission of Christ and see the possibility of it. And maybe the end bit of that evolutionary pathway was through Abraham and forming a Jewish nation. Sorry about that, but it's fascinating, really.
I'm sorry to throw in another cross-cultural reference, but that's 2001: A Space Odyssey, isn't it? But God had to break in each time to move humanity forward. So the incarnation, not particularly the big black block that it is in 2001, it is the Christ, isn't it? We needed that emphasis to move on as humanity. God had to break in. Otherwise, we wouldn't have evolved beyond where we were at. We were going nowhere. So he had to break in, give us a push.
In the Bible, that the Lord reaching into the world is to speak. So you get the process of creation itself, which is a process of speaking. And then you get the words of the prophets, which obviously speak into the land. And then the word actually becomes flesh, dwells among us.
And it introduces order, doesn't it? So
yeah,
you can't have a chaotic church. Order forms naturally. So fresh expression.
One way of reading that would be to say, well, when the Lord speaks and something actually happens, or when we embrace that thing which he has spoken, then that word becomes incarnate.
Yes. Yes.
Jesus was God in the flesh. The idea of presence highlights the role of relationship and connection and mission. Proximity. Jesus interacted directly with people from every level of society. We follow in his steps and be directly, actively involved in the lives of the people we're seeking to meet. This, of course, is the great limiter, that we can only touch so many people at once. We can only be physically present in one place at a time. which of course emphasizes the need that everyone needs to be part of this. But then if everyone in your church is part of this, then that growth can become exponential, can't it?
Yes.
Powerlessness. If we truly desire to act like Christ, we cannot rely on conventional forms of power and leadership to communicate. Let's practice Jesus' model of servanthood and humility in our relationships with one another in the world. Proclamation. Gospel invitation initiated in the ministry of Jesus remains alive and active. A genuine incarnation approach to Christ is always ready to share the gospel story. We cannot take this out of our calling and mission. So that's back to speaking. I find this interesting, this thing of deconstruction, if you like, of power, because the reason that Britain, for example, was historically a Christian country was because the powers of the country decided it would be so. And I found it really interesting during the Reformation, if you study the history of the Reformation in the principalities of Germany, which way individual German principalities would jump. Because sometimes they'd go the way of the prince, sometimes they go the way of the population, and sometimes neither. It's really curious to see how that kind of played out, and that it was always that kind of dialogue, the kind of dynamic between the population and the ruler about whether the state became Protestant or remained Catholic.
That's the story of the church in Russia, isn't it? I can't remember which one it was, Ivan or somebody like that. He had all the different faiths come and approach him. And obviously
But that was
the Muslims approached him and said, well, you pick this faith, you can't drink. And he went, I'm not having any of that, off you go. On that basis, he went with Christianity.
But I think that was the one about Kiev, wasn't it, where he sent envoys to Rome and Constantinople.
Yeah.
And the Romans gave him very rational and cogent arguments as to why they should go with Rome. And then the envoys came back from Constantinople and said, we couldn't know whether we were in heaven or on earth. And he said, oh, that's how we're going to go then. So Kiev went Orthodox. But that was about the ruler. And if you look at the history of the Church of Ireland, for example, which is quite interesting because it's very well documented, you can see how Patrick, for example, acted as a statesman, as a diplomat. He brokered deals, contracts, what's the word? He brokered agreements with rulers for land, for monasteries or for churches or for whatever. So, the growth of the church in Ireland was highly political. It was all about power. Patrick was a statesman, a politician. I mean, from that point of view, it's really interesting studying it because what you see there is the exercise of political power. It's a deal to broker relationships with princes and with rulers, with chiefs, with whatever. His ability to negotiate with powerful men on behalf of the church to secure guarantees of, autonomy for them and that kind of thing. And then you get his action as a statesman in his letter to Croticus, where Croticus has taken some slaves from somewhere or other, and Patrick tells him off. Send those men back home to their mummies and daddies. That's disgusting. You turned your brothers and sisters into slaves. So, yeah. But then in somewhere like Iran, obviously it's completely disconnected. It's subversive to the powers of the country. And like in China, it's subversive as well.
Mm.
Discover where locals gather and connect and locate a group within these social hubs for mission. Do locals actually gather anywhere nowadays? I mean, that's one of the things, isn't it? People just don't get together now, do they?
Mm.
Make one local cafe restaurant New York regular. Well, I can't afford to eat out every week, so I can't have a regular restaurant. Spend time at the school gate. I always think the school gate's really interesting because you see women at the school gate talking in groups, and then you get the terrifying politics of the school gate. But then you see blokes at the school gates, and they just stand there staring into space, completely ignoring each other. So you'll see the playground at the end of school, groups of women standing talking to each other, and then these blokes standing in splendid isolation, scattered around. And they'll kind of form an equidistance. So if another guy comes, then they'll all shuffle up a bit to make sure they're equally spaced out again. So it's really kind of interesting to see how that goes. Make room for people. I think this is where we could really actually make an impact, because now people are so antisocial, they very rarely have people to their homes. If we are actually hospitable, this actually really stands out, because not many people now are hospitable. And if we're warm and hospitable, that can make a profound impression.
Mm.
When you talk about context, do people actually have a generic context? Because my experience now, for example, in Gilwan, is that people are highly individualized, and actually their context is pretty much themselves. Or like Brimmer, you do actually get what you might call a social context, where you get a bunch of people that have something in common, like they're all related to each other, or all at the rugby club or something. So you have got a group of people there. You haven't really got that in Gilwan very much.
Mm.
What about being local? Do you actually feel local? Do you identify with your neighbours or with people around you where you live? Most definitely. And obviously, if you're going to go online, then the physical locality doesn't really matter, does it? It becomes really irrelevant.
Well, that's going to be interesting to see how it pans out now we have a nationalist government.
A nationalist government?
Yeah.
Have we got a nationalist government?
You got a Welsh nationalist government.
Oh, you mean Plaid Cymru in the Senedd?
It's a nationalist government, isn't it?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't think of that.
I mean, how hard are they going to push an identity? Very hard, I would have thought.
Well,
because nearly everything else.
I saw one of their candidates, that it was some immigrant down in Cardiff. Anyway, Plaid Cymru always used to be about Welsh speech and Welsh language. This oak had no idea about Welsh speech and language. So I thought they're obviously not, if you like, branding Welshness in the way that they used to brand Welshness nowadays. They're obviously gone for the kind of multi-culti Welshness that is quite a novelty, really.
Well, that's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. As I said, at the end of the day, they're the nationalist party.
Well, they certainly used to be a nationalist party, but I wonder now how nationalistic they are.
Well, they need to change the name and the principles if they're not.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that as, let's see how it pans out. I mean,
yeah, I suppose I'd forgotten about that. I've got no idea what they're going to do or anything.
We are the church in Wales, or we're here organised by a course that's run by the church in Wales. You now have a Welsh nationalist government in power, we are the church of that nationalist government. I know we're not established, but we're as near as an established church as you can get.
Yeah.
How hard are we going to drive now on this Welsh identity, and what is going to define Welsh identity? What's going to identify being Welsh? Where are they going to go? I mean, at the end of the day, the only things that are devolved are education, health. Can't do anything about health. It's all budget, and you can't attract, top surgeons to Wales. They'd rather be in London or Manchester. But so there's not a lot they can do there. Education, they can really have a good old tinker around with, and they already have with a curriculum for Wales. But really, all they're left with is pushing this nationalism. So it should be interesting to see how it pans out.
Well, you can get surgeons in Wales, Tim, if you make the job.
Not in North Wales, we can't.
That's all they've got to do. Well, they've got to do a bit of work improving the number of theatre establishments. Don't start.
I'm just. We've got Betsy Cadwallader Trust in the north, and I once talked to one of the trustees, and shocking outcomes and whatever, and they just explained to me, the basics was, we're a little pond, and if you're a driven cardiothoracic surgeon, your opportunities are many manifold higher just over the border in Liverpool or Manchester than they would be, working in Llandudno.
Oh, cardiothoracics are a bad choice because the cardiologists do all the work now non-invasively.
Yeah.
So, bad choice.
I'm just saying it should be interesting.
Anyway, should be.
Do you hang out with tax collectors and sinners?
Yes, my parents were tax collectors, and my dad was very proud of the fact that he had one of the oldest professions.
One of them became a disciple.
I tell you what, if you change that to paedophiles and extreme right wing, I think people in the church would have a different viewpoint, because I'd say there are people in society that are just as untouchable.
Oh, I agree.
It's just different people we identify.
Let's rephrase it. Who are the social pariahs now?
Well, I've just explained the two.
Yeah, and that's basically what is happening there.
Racists, I should think. Paedophiles bottom of the pile, racists next. Welsh nationalists other than Welsh ones, perhaps.
Well, English nationalists are bad, but Welsh.
They're bad, yeah. Scottish ones, Welsh ones are fine.
Yeah.
Just English ones are bad. Because if they get into power, it's fascism. Welsh ones are fine then.
They're not fascists at all.
No. Just a nationalist government. Built along ethno-sociological lines. That should go rather well.
Mind you, in Zimbabwe,
well, in Europe in the 40s, I think it can.
Both the main revolutionary parties were both overtly nationalistic. You got ZANU and ZAPU. ZANU was Zimbabwe African National Union, and ZAPU was Zimbabwe African Political Union. And one of them was sponsored by Russia, the other was sponsored by China. And they were both tribally nationalistic. Joshua and Nkomo and ZAPU was Russian-sponsored Ndebele nationalism. So it wasn't even just black nationalism; it was Ndebele nationalism. And ZANU wasn't just black African nationalism; that was Shona black African nationalism. And if any others that weren't Shonas decided to take a pop, they were dead. They slaughtered the Ndebele just to make the point. We're the rulers now. You do as we say. And the little guys, the Venda, the Patonka, the Sutu, they forget that. They don't even count. They don't figure. So yeah, that was nationalism in action. That was. There are sent people. Father sent me, so I send you. I must admit, seeing this, I thought, has he actually ever actually had a church? Has he actually ever run a church? Oh dear. Oh, there we are. It's getting late now. Exploring missions, exploring missional church, forming communities of hope in the great unraveling. So, what do you reckon? What does this mean for your understanding of mission and ministry in your context in Wales? What is the biggest learning? What questions have stayed with you from this session? Where can you see the God of mission already at work in your own context? In what ways do churches in your context need to catch up with what God is doing? In what ways do we make sure we're listening to God through prayer, scripture, church tradition, through conversation with people across communities and wider society? Excuse me. Anyway, so before we knock it on the head, anyone got any comments?
One thing they never seem to mention is people with doom and gloom. I hang on to the fact of what Christ said to St. Peter, that you're the rock upon which I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, whichever wordage you use to describe that principle. And whatever form the church will evolve into, it won't stop.
No, I think you're right there, Bevan.
And people talk about the great unraveling. I read part of that and I thought, well, what about this piece of scripture that you're totally ignoring? And it's there. And our Lord said that. And what he says goes.
Yeah, but on a similar level, Blyden, I like the point that he made that Jeremiah said to the exiles in Babylon, stop moaning about the temple and stop wanting to get back to the temple. Look, there comes a time sometimes we have to knuckle down where we don't want to be.
Yeah.
And we can't, stop harping back to the temple. The temple's gone. We're somewhere where we don't want to be. Okay, we'll cry our tears, but we dig in. We remain faithful.
Build houses and live in them, plant vineyards and reap their fruit.
Yeah, and I think realistically, that's possibly where the organised church is, isn't it? And particularly in the UK.
Yeah.
We can't cry over the temple and want to get back to the temple. It's not that season.
No, but it's still there.
It's still there. Of course, it's still there.
Yeah. Trying to find the quote from Jeremiah about that: build houses and live in them, plant fields.
It's quoted in the Great Unraveling. I've got it somewhere in my notes. It's not 27. No, it isn't that.
He really is a Jeremiah Roxburgh, isn't he?
Oh, yes. Good point.
But then again, he's got Scottish roots and they tend to be quite dour.
Jeremiah 29, verses 5 to 7. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and daughters. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you in exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So it's Jeremiah 29, 5 to 7. So wherever you find yourself, seek the prosperity of that place. Live there. The Lord will be with you. There we are. Anyone else got anything to say? I'm tired. I'm tired. Laura, would you like to say prayers and then I'll go to bed?
Heavenly Father, help us in our mission for you. Help us find our way and to grow your church. Help us find those that need you and guide us through the week to come. Amen.
Amen.
There we go. Well, may the Lord bless you all. Have a good night and see you next week.
Thank you.